Hello, my name is Sam Feltham and welcome to Expert Interviews here on Smash the Fat. And with me today is a guy that I've been wanting to get on the show ever since we started, and we finally got to it. I wanted to get him on originally about his first book, The Great Cholesterol Con, but now in the past couple of months he came out with a great book called Doctoring Data. It's Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. How you doing, Malcolm?
Very well, thanks. Nice to talk to you.
Absolutely. Fantastic to have you on. I had the pleasure of meeting you at the Statination 2 premiere, and kind of I managed to speak to Andy at your publisher and fix this interview. And thankfully, you gave away one of your books with an accompanying DVD as well. And for those that entered, there can only be one winner, unfortunately, and that is Michael Pollard, who wins the hardback limited edition copy with DVD. So I'll be contacting you later today, Michael, to sort out your postal address and things like that. And congratulations to all of the other entrants, but there can only be one, as they say in Highlander. But anyway, moving on with the actual interview itself. Before we do get into doctoring data, and it's a very, very apt title, Doctor, how did you exactly get into becoming a doctor and then becoming somewhat of a skeptic as well?
Well, becoming a doctor bit was fairly simple. I got all these exam results and I thought, well, what do I want to do? And I thought, well, medicine sounds interesting. I'll have a go at that. No, I wanted to go in because it just seemed an interesting area, and it is, and I'm glad I've done it. But how did I become skeptical? I suppose when I was younger, my father, who sadly died last year, but a very, very bright man. I remember we were doing something. He was helping me study. I think it was maths, and I'm rubbish at maths. And he just looked at a textbook and ripped a page out and said, "Well, that's complete rubbish." And I thought, somebody wrote in textbooks. I thought everything was written in a textbook must be true, and clever people did it. So it was quite nice to have that kind of model of someone saying, well, this is just rubbish, that shouldn't be published. Now, whether or not that inculcated into me, but I suppose I was just a doctor. I, did doctory things, learned all these facts that I thought were true. And a lot of people have asked me, well, what caused you to become skeptical? I think I was probably a bit skeptical generally anyway. But my Damascene moment, I think, I was at a conference in Scotland where they were talking about a study that had come out in hypertension. And the results were just, I thought, completely astonishingly unimpressive. Nothing seemed to happen. And I thought, well, surely that's interesting. Surely we should be looking at this. There didn't seem to be any effect on heart disease rates. The reduction in cardiovascular mortality was zero. And yet everyone just nodded their heads and carried on. And I left myself, a bit like the man that missed the bus, and everyone else went off, and I was standing alone at the bus stop thinking, why is nobody questioning this?
What just happened?
What's happened? Yeah. And I thought, but I just looked at the data and thought, why is no one sticking their hand in here and going, we seem to be just ignoring this. So I suppose I started looking at that. I was interested in heart disease anyway, because being Scottish, Scotland had the highest rate of heart disease in the world at that time, or at least it was thought to have. I don't know if it did, but it had a very high rate. And I'd been studying it for some time and thinking, it doesn't really make sense. What we're being told doesn't make sense. The Scots don't eat that much saturated fat. They just don't. They eat a lot less than the French. And our blood pressures weren't that high. And everyone goes, oh, the Scots eat deep-fried Mars bar as well. That's a bit of a joke. People do.
It's a bit of an urban legend. People do, but
students do it on a Saturday night if they're completely, pissed and think, let's have a deep fried Mars bar, and they have them occasionally. And once you've had one, you'll never have another. But I started looking at France and Scotland and thinking, the French, they've got higher saturated fat, they've got higher cholesterol levels, the blood pressure is a bit higher, they don't take any more exercise, their obesity levels are the same. In fact, then they smoke more. You took the French and the Scots and put them side by side. The French should, according to all the ideas, have more heart disease than the Scots. And they had a sixth of the rate, 1/6. So I thought, there's something else going on here. this isn't making sense. And as I started looking more and more into it, the whole simplistic idea just fell apart for me, really.
And that's where you come to writing The Great Cholesterol Con, your first book.
Yeah, well, it took me quite a long time to get there. For a long time, I thought I was the only person in the world who thought cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease. There didn't seem to be everyone else who just, that's it, cholesterol causes heart disease. And I was for many years thinking, no, it doesn't. This is rubbish. It doesn't make any sense. And then I started to find a few other people around the world who agreed with this. In fact, my hero, Ufi Ravniskov, who you've probably met, who started the International Network of Cholesterol Skeptics, we started talking. I thought, you know, I think I am right. You know, we are sensible. We are intelligent, sensible people. We've looked at it and we realized it's wrong. And then I thought, well, I better write about this. I did write in various journals, but eventually I sat down and wrote the book, if you like. And that's going back 7 or 8 years now, I think. So I just thought, well, I think people should know that this is all nonsense.
Excellent. And that was kind of it. In my eyes, it's kind of the first book that really kind of tackles the whole cholesterol and heart disease link.
Yeah.
And there's kind of been others in a similar vein as well, almost called exactly the same as well.
Well, there was one called exactly the same thing, but
yeah, I think there was.
But I think around the world, there's people who've looked at the research and thought, this is just nonsense. I mean, obviously, you know, the first things you find out are that there is no such thing as cholesterol in your blood, and the whole nomenclature is bonkers. I mean, the idea is very simple. You eat cholesterol level in your blood goes up, clogs up your arteries, and you die. Simplest idea possible. But even when that first started, people knew that if you ate cholesterol, it didn't raise your cholesterol level in your blood. You don't have a cholesterol level in your blood anyway. You've got lipoproteins. And what makes your lipoproteins go up? And the moment you start finding out about this stuff, as you probably know yourself, it just starts to disintegrate into a complete mess. And yet people have tried. I sometimes liken it to building a cathedral on a bog, where they've built their cathedral, they started to build it, they've created this thing, and it's starting to collapse, and then you put buttresses on it, and further buttresses on it, and buttresses on the buttresses, but gradually the whole thing is just sinking into the bog. You feel like saying, well, you got it wrong. You're building a cathedral in the wrong damn place. You see that bit to the side? It's all nice and rocky. Build your cathedral there, and it won't sink. And or whatever the correct analogy is, people have desperately tried to keep a dead hypothesis alive for various reasons, as you know, financial mainly. And so we're now left in this mad situation whereby the entire medical profession, it seems, is wedded to something that is demonstrably, scientifically, in all ways, just wrong.
And that kind of leads us on to you writing doctoring data, which is much more than just, you know, cholesterol causes heart disease. It's kind of a real kind of tackling of taking on all kind of medical data, because every other week we're told that sausages, eating 2 sausages a day or something, can increase our risk of death by 50% or something stupid like that, and then tomatoes can kill you the next week or something like that. I mean, it's a very good tagline on your book, How to Sort Out Medical Advice from Medical Nonsense. And there's a good quote that you start off with from Thomas Jefferson. If people let the government decide what foods they eat and what medicines they take, their bodies will soon be in as sorry a state as their souls, who live under tyranny. And that's kind of, you know, the real essence of the book. What was kind of the inception of this book? Was it that you wanted to kind of tackle this entirely as a thing, or was there a different concept at the beginning?
Well, I started off by saying, well, there's an awful lot of stuff we're told which is nonsense. Like salt's bad for you, cholesterol's bad for you, sunshine's bad for you, blah, you know. In fact, just about everything you're told is bad for you isn't bad for you. Smoking's bad for you, by the way. Exercise is good for you. We know these 2 things to be true. However, outside of those 2, it's very difficult to be certain about any of this facts. So I started writing my, you know, fluoridation of water is nonsense. Screening for cancer is possibly does more harm than good, etc., etc. The whole series of things. But then I started thinking about the introduction well, why should you believe me, a GP, versus all these decorated experts who, wander around the world giving talks and being very impressive and knowing all sorts of stuff. So I started to think, well, people should know, where does this data come from? How is it created? Why is it presented to you in this way? How does it get manipulated? What's it all about, if you like? And so the book became almost an analysis of how the entire medical research publication world has become, I hate to use the word corrupted, maybe use the word biased, whichever word you prefer. It now is almost impossible to believe anything that comes out. And just because someone is Professor Harman Schwartz of the University of whatever, doesn't mean anything they have to say means anything. And what you have to try and do is try and find out, well, where did this information come from? Why is it being presented to you like this? Why is it likely to be wrong? What are the games that are played with it? And so hopefully give people an opportunity. They might not believe me. I might not be right about everything. Obviously I am right about everything. But people might think, maybe I'm not right about everything. Why should I believe you? So I thought, well, if I present them with all the ways that data are put together, they might at least have some more ability to say, well, actually, I can make my mind up about this. I use the idea of crumple, throw, bin, which is, once you've seen a certain research presented in certain ways, this research is complete nonsense and can be completely ignored.
And one of the the first chapter, because in the book, there's pretty much 10 chapters, which you call the 10 tools for establishing the truth, which essentially is what they are. And the first one is association does not mean causation. And that's something that's kind of repeated a lot. So what exactly does that mean?
Well, I think it's an awful lot of what we are told nowadays comes from where people have studied, say, 100,000 people or a large group of people, and then said, well, what do these people do? Well, they eat vegetables, or they take exercise, or they, et cetera, et cetera. There's a big study been going on for years called the Nurses' Health Initiative. Basically, nurses in America have been studied for years and years, and what do they do, and what do they smoke, and what do they eat, and everything like this. And then they've said, right, they do this and that, and then the other thing. And look, some people who say eat vegetables live longer than people who don't. And then they say, eating vegetables protects you against dying young or various diseases. Now that's an association. In other words, these people do that and they're less likely to have this happen. The counter argument is, and it was used, changing the subject slightly, in women it was called HRT, hormone replacement therapy. Now, for many years, it was thought that women were protected against heart disease by their sex hormones being different than men's. And people started giving women hormone replacement therapy. And women who took hormone replacement therapy were much less likely to die of heart disease. So people said, well, it's definitely true. It is female sex hormones and it is a protection. What they didn't recognize is that at that time, women who took HRT in the early days were far more health conscious. Middle and upper class, although there are no upper class in America, apparently. Took exercise, drank moderately, didn't smoke, had good jobs, were highly educated, blah, 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 blah. So everything about these women was healthy, but they decided it was the hormone replacement therapy that was the thing that was protecting them. Well, when they did a study and gave, I can't remember how many, 20,000 women HRT and 20,000 women didn't have HRT, it turned out HRT caused heart disease. So the association, although it was apparently strong, turned out to be exactly wrong, because there's what these call confounders. So people who say eat sausages and are found to die of bowel cancer more frequently. Well, what they won't then say is, well, what else do these people do? What are sausage eaters likely to do? Mm-hmm. Well, they're likely to smoke, for example. They're likely not to take exercise compared to people who don't eat sausages, because people have heard that sausages are unhealthy. So people with healthy lifestyles choose not to eat sausages. So the people who are still eating them are the people who don't give a stuff, frankly. So we get this association and then say, it's a cause. Well, it's not a cause. It never can be a cause. And almost everything, 5 portions of fruit and vegetables, sausages, coffee, any of these studies, basically someone said, what do these people do? They do this. They've got less of that. That's a cause. They don't quite say it's a cause, but by the time it reaches the popular press, it's, 3 sausages will kill you from bowel cancer. So in a story. And this is just utter rubbish, and it should just be instantly ignored and thrown away. So anything that comes from a study that is not a controlled study, or when the association is although they say it doubles your risk of bowel cancer, what you've got to remember is your risk of bowel cancer over the next 5 years might have been 1%, and it's increased to 2%. And that's probably less than that, but that would be called a doubling. But that's a relative risk doubling. But actually, in real terms, it's a 1% increase in risk over the next 5 years of getting it, not of dying of it, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
So once you start teasing all these statistics apart, it's basically just, well, it's an association, ignore. It's not a strong association, ignore. They're looking at relative, not absolute risk, ignore. Just ignore, ignore, ignore. These things, just this stuff is just nonsense.
It's almost scaremongering as well to a certain extent. And it's important to kind of understand the difference, because you were touching on it there, between absolute and relative risk. Because as you say, with the bowel cancer, your risk might have been 1%.
Yeah.
You know, and kind of it doubles there, but it's 1% in the first place. So don't worry about it.
Yeah. Well, I use an example in the book of alcohol, or whatever they call increased alcohol consumption, increases your risk of throat and mouth cancer by, I think they said it triples your risk of throat and mouth cancer. Well, that sounds scary. Well, what is your risk of throat and mouth cancer? Well, it's 0.00025%. That's your risk of getting it and dying of it. So you increase it potentially to 0.00075%. Lots of zeros. I mean, don't quote me exactly on this, because
no, paraphrasing, but
I'm paraphrasing. But and then the other thing is, of course, that then they just say, well, that's mouth cancer and throat cancer, but then they don't say, well, you can die of other things than this. So when you look at, say, moderate alcohol consumption, it increases the risk of this, and this, and it all sounds terrifying. But when you look at the overall mortality, it's reduced. So whatever these increased risks are, on the other hand, it must be doing some things that are decreasing your risks. So again, that's another thing, is apart from going slightly back to the absolute and relative risk, I've asked about 100 doctors in my time, do they know what the difference is? And none of them know, by the way. I have never yet spoken to a doctor who knows what the difference between absolute and relative risk is. They'll go, oh, yes, I know, and go, well, perhaps you'd like to explain it to me. At which point,
go on,
well, it's, so you don't know, do you? The difference is essentially, somebody said it's the difference between addition and multiplication. So say you decide to treat 100 people with blood pressure lowering medication, and 100 people you give a placebo to. At the end of the year, 2 people have died in the placebo group and 1 person has died in the treatment group. Does that make sense? There's 2 versus 1, all right? So the relative difference is 50%, okay? The absolute difference is 1%, okay? So relative risk difference, 50% reduction, absolute risk reduction, 1 in 100, okay? But you can keep doing this. So if you did the same experiment with 1,000 people, 2 versus 1 in the end, that's still a 50% relative risk reduction, but a 0.1% absolute risk reduction. Do it with 10,000 people, 50%, 0.01. And you can keep doing this. So you can say the relative risk reduction is 50%. That is completely irrelevant. It is meaningless and pointless to come up with these statistics. What matters is, did you have a 1 in 10,000 risk to start with, a 1 in a million risk to start with, or a 1 in 2 risk to start with? If your risk is 1 in 2, a 50% reduction is pretty damn good. If your risk is 1 in a million, a 50% reduction is virtually, well, it's so unimportant, it doesn't matter. So medical research studies come out with relative risks when it comes to benefits. So they say this drug will reduce your risk of dying of heart disease by 30%. Well, 30% of what? 30% of a really big number, or 30% of a really small number. So unless you know what the underlying risk was, the relative risk is a meaningless figure. You can't work out what that means to you, all right? So I quite often say to patients, it sounds impressive, but what does it mean to you? And I'm also trying to work out different parametrics to look at, with saying, well, what's your average increase in life expectancy likely to be? So when I look at statins, and they say they reduce your relative risk, they don't say relative risk, they just say risk of dying of heart disease by 30%. I've calculated that with a guy from the Medical Research Council. It comes to about, and this is for very high risk people, it comes to about 15 days over 5 years of taking a statin.
Whoa!
All right. Now that's the best possible and the highest risk groups of people, okay?
Yeah.
So for most people, it'd be about 3 days in 5 years. And that's assuming the data are accurate and there's not been manipulated in any way, etc., etc. So what we're talking about is pitiful increases in life expectancy presented as gigantic differences. And when I speak to other doctors and I say you were a high-risk patient, you took a statin gave it to your patient for 5 years, how much longer do you think you'd expect them to live? And they say things like 2 years or 3 years. And I say, well, the maximum possible difference is 15 days. And they go, ooh. And I go, yeah, well, that's the reality. That's where relative risk becomes important, because again, it's like with screening tests. They say you reduce your risk of dying of breast cancer by 40%. There's all sorts of provisos in there. But then again, there's all sorts of additional things that come into here. But what's your chances that you'll be falsely positively identified? What's the risk of having the investigation in the first place? What was your underlying risk in the first place? Now, most people can't be bothered understanding these things, or I mean, it's quite difficult to actually work them out. And I wouldn't expect people to do this, but they have to know that these games are being played. And then if they are concerned, they have to try and work it out. So what I have done in the book is try to say, well, this is what it really means as closely as I can understand it. And this is really what your benefits might be a bit. I haven't done too much of that in this book, because I haven't set it out as you must not get breast cancer screening, you must not do this, you must do this, you must not do that. That's my next book, which tells everybody what to do. I think, don't do this, don't do that. But it's trying to say to people, giving you the tools to try and understand this stuff. So when you hear a story saying, bananas make you live 10 years longer or reduce your risk of this, where did that come from? Well, now know where it came from. It came from an association study. It's meaningless. It should be obliterated from your consciousness. Carry on. Enjoy yourself. That's another of the messages. We're not all about to instantly die if we eat a sausage. We're not going to instantly die if we drink 2.2 units of alcohol per day instead of 3 or 1 or whatever it's supposed to be. We're actually quite resilient. What are the things that really matter are being submerged by this just noise that people can't make any head or tail of.
It is almost that news anxiety, is that we're kind of building up in today's society, and it's kind of been building up for the past 50 years. There's more and more 24-hour news channels coming. You're going to die from terrorism, you're going to die from sausages, you're going to die from all sorts. Maybe sausage wielding terrorists, I don't know. The next one, but you kind of say it here as well, which is chapter number 2, which is lives cannot be saved. We are all going to die.
Yes.
It's not like you save a life forever. We're all unfortunately doomed to a certain extent.
Well, it's a part of life. It was not the cheery.
It's morbid, but it's something to reflect.
Well, I think it's trying to just remind people that you can't save life. Well, you can. I mean, if you were choking and I did they call it Heimlich maneuver anyway, they call it abdominal thrusts, stop you choking, I could say, well, I saved your life. Well, of course, I'm not going to say, actually, I've extended your life by 19.26 days on average. I'll take the credit. But, the simple fact is that almost everything we're talking about here is about life extension. It's not about, people don't become immortal if you give them statins. People don't stop dying. The question is, will you live longer? How much longer, on average, are you likely to get? And is it worth it? If it's for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, most people would say, oh, stuff it. Can't be bothered with that. But if it was for 10 years. But equally, if I said, I'm going to put you in a coma for you'll never experience any stimuli at all. I'm going to put you in a coma. I'm going to reduce your core temperature to 25 degrees. And I can guarantee you'll live 150 years. Or you're going to go, you know what? I don't really want 150 years lying in a hypothermic coma. Nobody would want to do that. You'd rather have 1 day alive, wouldn't you? So the other issue here is, how much are you damaging the quality of your life? How much is your quality of life being affected by all this stuff? This is my big problem with statins, is we're told they have no adverse effects, and they are just, in fact, people feel better when they're on statins. Their life becomes a coruscating joy. Well, I know that's not true. I've met many people, many patients. I've spoken to hundreds of people who've suffered really nasty and unpleasant, and in some cases, irreversible side effects from taking statins. Their lives have been ruined. Now, even if they were to get another 10 years, is that worth it for them? Well, that's not a decision I can make on their behalf. As I always say, you can make these juggling decisions on longer and miserable, shorter or happy. I don't know which one you want. Of course, depends how much more miserable and how much longer and how much shorter. But these are not my decisions for people to make. Some people would gladly do almost anything. I mean, Angelina Jolie had both her breasts removed to prevent her from getting cancer. Now that's had effect on her quality of life. It must have done, but she says it's worth it. Other women might say, no, I wouldn't do that. I just wait. So we're all different in the risks and the benefits that we want to have. But I think unless you know what they are, unless you've got some idea of what they are, then you can't make those decisions for yourself. They say the prostate cancer screening, for example, is, in my opinion, a waste of time. But some people might say, well, I just absolutely have to know. I couldn't cope with the idea that there might be a cancer growing and I wouldn't know about it. So I want to be tested and tested and tested. I wouldn't, maybe you wouldn't. I have no idea what your ideas on these things are. So most people, there's definites. What's, take a drug for 50 years and live an extra 2 days, forget about it. A year, maybe 2 years, and it depends on the side effects that you're getting. But people need to know, and that's what I've tried to do, is to say, I'm trying to help you understand what benefits you might get, what that might mean for you, how to establish it for yourself, and then make decisions. And so when you go to your doctor, you're not just a kind of, yes, doctor, I will take these, and yes, doctor, I will take those. You might want to question them and say, well, really, what are the benefits here?
Yeah, do the benefits outweigh the detrimental side effects there? Which kind of brings me on to our to almost the end of the interview, but on the blog, Larry Diamond asked, are more GPs aware of all the side effects of statins, and are they informing patients as well?
Well, clear update, Laurie. I don't know for sure what doctors think about statins. I do know that off the record, an awful lot of more GPs come up to me and go, I think these statins are bloody awful, and I see a lot of people getting side effects, and I really don't like them. They won't speak on record, unfortunately, for reasons that I'm not going to go into here. But yes, I think a lot of GPs have seen a lot of problems. I, for a while, was a member of the General Practitioners Committee, which is the BMA representative committee for GPs. And on that committee are kind of like the people who know an awful lot of stuff. And a lot of them did come up to me and say, I really admire your stance against this, and I don't like statins and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, the British Medical Association in its representative meeting voted unanimously against the latest guidelines on giving statins to people at lower risk. So there is quite a swell of opinion out there. It's just it's not breaching the surface yet, but I think it, and I hope that it will. Do they tell patients about the adverse effects? Rarely. They rarely tell patients about adverse effects of anything. They tend to say, read this leaflet, usually in Polish, and because they've imported them from Krakow, wherever it is that they're cheaper to make, and decide for yourself. I do tend to say to people, they can cause this, 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 and this. If you get these problems, let me know, and then we can decide what to do. I very rarely put people on statins, as you can imagine, but people who are already on statins, I'll quite often have these discussions with them.
Yeah, and it's a sad state of affairs that we're in, but from the sense that I get from you is that kind of things are bubbling, particularly within the British Medical Association, that there might be a bit of a change and a bit of a backlash, but I think we're looking at kind of decades here.
Well, it might
in terms of change.
I think it might be decades. I think when these things change, it's like that. When they do go, the BMA is running at the BMJ, sorry, the British Medical Journal, the editor, and a number of people are running a whole campaign called Too Much Medicine, which is looking at, they think people are being tested, investigated, and drugged, and blah 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 too much. So there is an upswell against this kind of mass medication going on, and I do think that we may see a sudden collapse in the dam, hopefully. But the problem with these things is a bit like when the Berlin Wall came down. Nobody thought that was going to happen. Nobody thought that was going to happen for decades. And when it came down, bang, things changed very quickly when they change. I'm kind of hoping it will be soon, but well, if it isn't, at least I can say I've been doing what I can. I've made as much noise about it as I am capable of doing, and I don't think I can do any more than that.
Very good approach. And on that bombshell, just to forward people to all of your writings, because you've got a fantastic blog that is very active, and you've got a great community of people there discussing in your comment sections. And it's drmalcolmkendrick.org. That's drmalcolmkendrick.org. You can follow Dr. Kendrick on Twitter at Malcolm Ken, and then you can buy Doctoring Data on Amazon UK. If you follow smashthefat.com/DDUK, it will take you straight through and it will help support the show. And if you're in the US, head to smashthefat.com/DDUS. That will take you through to the Amazon.com website. And if you buy it, then it will help support the show as well. So thank you so much for your time today, Doc. It's been a pleasure speaking to you with your quick wit and honesty as well. That's in Doctoring Data is absolutely fantastic. And as kind of your colleagues have said, I certainly admire your stance on it, given your positions as well. And that means that there's only one more thing to do, and that's something that we do with all of our guests, and that's for you to shout, smash it out to the camera on the count of 3. So 1, 2, 3.
Smash it out.
That's what I'm talking about. And with that as well, you briefly mentioned that you're going to be coming out with another book. Is there an ETA on that at all? Or
it depends on my levels of laziness. I mean, I've got hundreds of pages of stuff kind of vaguely rambling around that I've written here and there, but I want to speak to the publishers and just sort of work out what's the best way of going about this. So there is no ETA currently, no, but it is going to happen. Yeah.
Next few years, we'll look out for it for sure. And you're always welcome back on the show.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Yeah, appreciate
Fantastic. It. All right, Dr. Kendrick, thank you very much, everybody. Check out Doctoring Data on Amazon and check out Dr. Kendrick's blog, drmalcolmkendrick.org. And then until next time, be well, and of course, smash it out. Thanks, Doc.
Cheers.